You're listening to His Empire of Dirt by Pearlandpine. Chapter 17. The Afton Women Broke. Mike listened to Dad tell Liz a bedtime story. Mike's heart, of course, burned with jealousy, but there was an emptiness there, too. The kind of thing that only happened when you had severed your relationship with every important person in your life. "Tired, sweetheart?" Dad asked. Mike flinched at just the sound of his father's voice and retreated closer to his own bedroom door. "Yeah," Liz said with a yawn. Mike heard Dad chuckle, and in her room he probably kissed Liz goodnight and tucked her in under the sheets. Mike never understood why Dad doted on Liz but hated him. "Good. We got a big day tomorrow, yeah? We're going to the circus." For some reason, Liz never referred to circus babies as its true namesake, only calling it the circus. Liz giggled and yawned once more, and Dad's footsteps sauntered out of the room as he killed her light. "Good night, dear." He softly shut her door, and Mike was too slow to make it back to his own room. Dad barely turned to him and huffed. "What are you doing up, Michael?" Just using the bathroom," Mike stammered, and his breath hitched in his throat, because he never lied to Dad. "Sorry, I'll be quick." Yeah. Your sister and I will be out all day tomorrow. I expect you will be here when I return." Yeah, Dad." "Stop stammering, Michael." His father rolled his eyes. "It's entirely unbecoming." Mike frowned, looked at his feet, and nodded. His father did not bid him a good night as he made his way to his own bedroom. Mike waited a few moments before he was sure that Dad was turned in for the night, and then he surreptitiously crept to his sister's door, creaking it open. He closed the door behind him and knocked once more. "Lizzie, are you awake?"
"Yeah, Mike?"
Liz rubbed her eyes, her blonde hair already a mess, squashed on her pillow. She rolled her eyes. She had mastered many of their father's mannerisms by age 12.
"What do you want?"
"I need to talk to you." Mike gestured to turn on the lamp on Liz's bedside table, right beneath her painting of a flower. Her room was entirely adorned by paintings of flowers, but most of them had been store-bought. The one above the lamp had been entirely a certified Elizabeth Afton creation. "Is that okay?" This was a risky maneuver. At best, Liz said yes. At worst, she whined, like she usually did, yelled for Dad, and Dad would drag Mike back to his room. To Mike's delight, though, Liz nodded, still rolling her eyes, and patted the side of her bed for him to sit. Mike bounced from his toes to his heels and sat on the side of the bed.
"What?"
Mike inhaled and shut his eyes.
"I miss you." "What? You talk too fast."
"I said I miss you." It had been a year and some change since Evan died. A year since Charlotte. Uncle Henry was still a mess, only sputtering to life when Dad coerced him to. Mom was much the same, though her movements were much more stunted, as if she was moving through water. Mike had little to no friends, and in his own house he was worse than a black sheep. He was dirt. Mike spent most of his time with his father. That meant Mike spent most of his time with the monster.
"We live in the same house, stupid,"
Liz retorted, rolling her eyes again. But it was more of an instinct instead of an actual depiction of aggravation.
How can you miss me?
Because Dad loves you. And he doesn't love me, Lizzie.
That's not...
Liz, come on.
Your dad's favorite.
Evan was Mom's. I'm no one's. The room was unbearably silent until Liz softly added,
You were Evan's favorite.
Mike's heart would break if it had not already been incinerated.
I miss Evan.
I do too, Liz. I miss hanging out with you. I know we drove each other crazy, but I really do. I really, really want to hang out with you again. I can't take being alone anymore. If I'm honest, and you're the only one who knows what it's like to lose Evan like I do. To lose a little brother.
No. I don't.
Liz stared at him with empty eyes.
You killed him, Mike. Do you know what it's like to live with someone who killed your little brother?
Liz's voice lowered as she stared at her knees under the blanket.
I don't want you to hurt me, too.
Liz. Mike at least now knew that he was a monster. Well, he had known that for a long time, but this had only solidified it. I won't hurt you. I deserve what Dad does to me. But I won't ever hurt you and make it worse for the both of us. Mike hooked his pinky in the air. I pinky promise. Liz gasped. As a child and an individual just entering teenhood, a pinky promise was completely and utterly sacred. She hastily shook her head in disbelief.
I don't know, Mikey.
I'll let you ride on my handlebars on the way to school, Mike promised. And I'll let you paint my nails once, every 2 weeks. Liz narrowed her eyes and raised her pinky.
Once every 1 week.
Mike sighed, suppressing a victorious smile. Deal. They hooked pinkies, and Liz let out a childish smile and giggle. Hey, I have an idea. You've got to be quiet, though. We can't get caught. Liz was entirely one for getting caught, since she loved being the center of attention, but she mimed zipping her lips shut and nodded, letting Mike take her hand and lead her into his bedroom. He raised a finger to his lips and nodded, and then he took his Walkman out from his dresser and handed it to Liz. He grabbed his headphones, plugged it in, and let the music loudly emanate from them, loud enough for the both of them to hear, but muffled behind the door so that their parents couldn't hear.
Ooh, you can dance, you can jive, having the time of your life. Ooh, see that girl, watch that scene, digging the dancing queen.
Mike and Liz quietly pranced in their room, holding hands, holding the Walkman, and for the first time in more than a year, he thought that he had a family member back.
I'll talk to Dad, Mikey.
Liz offered when he returned her to her room. It was midnight, rendering getting caught perhaps even more dangerous. She yawned, nestling her head into the pillow.
You know, you said I'm his favorite, so maybe he'll listen to me. I'll tell him you're my friend again, and that you won't hurt me. I trust you, Mike.
Mike beamed. Thanks, Lizzie. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Night, Mikey.
He inched the door shut, and when he was on the other side, the sight before him startled him before he could relish in the very tiny victory. He was elated to see that it was Mom's figure there instead of Dad's.
Mike,
Mom said, and she smiled very softly.
good night.
Night, Mom. Mike didn't hug her. He didn't feel like he had the right to. So he turned on his heel and made his way to his room. He spied on Mom through the crack between the door and its frame, though. He watched her go to Evan's room, lean her head against his door, and start tapping against the door, as if to softly wake him up for the next morning.
My baby,
She muttered, and Mike shut the door. And without him knowing, they both cried together. Mom was gone shopping for the day, so Mike spent his respite alone doodling and listening to Michael Jackson. He bolted from the couch when he heard the door open and close downstairs. He was far too excited for the day. Had Lizzie spoken to Dad? Was Dad going to be so much kinder? Were Mike and Liz going to keep being best friends? Would... Dad? Mike muttered, the word barely forming. Dad was standing in the living room, frozen aside from his shaking hands. One hand on a lighter, another barely grasping a cigarette. His face was dotted with blood, his hands coated in it. Mike paled. Did another Charlotte happen? What happened? What happened? What happened? What happened? Mike hurried downstairs, ready to face his father's wrath because he was more curious than fearful. Dad, are you okay? Where's Lizzie? Michael, Dad snapped, and his face contorted into rage for a moment. And then the anger subsided. Dad's hands shook, and Dad's hands never shook, as he pressed the cigarette to his lips, lighting the end. I am fine. Really? That's a relief. I'm glad you're okay, Michael. Be quiet for me. Okay. Michael. Mike mouthed a sorry, staring at his father's red hands. Dad seemed entirely unlike himself, right then. His tie was loose, his suit was unbuttoned, his hair was a mess, his eyes were wide with something unrecognizable. Mike stood there for a while, watching his father smoke, wondering what had happened. I'll lie to Uncle Henry again, if you need me to, Mike muttered, because he couldn't stand the quiet any longer. I know. Dad's voice was so unlike himself, so small, that Mike thought for a moment that an endoskeleton had stolen his father's skin and completely taken over his life. Maybe the animatronic would be kinder to me than he is. I'll be in my study. Dad turned away from Mike and made his way to his destination, smoke festering in the room.
Dad?
Mike called, his voice cracking.
Where's Lizzie?
Dad paused for a moment, resting his head against the wall. Without making eye contact with Mike, he shook his head. And then he disappeared into his room. Mike stared. He pondered. He was frightened. And he waited. Dad was quiet. That was bad. Very bad. Dad was never quiet. He wasn't even punishing Mike throughout the week. Instead, he remained in his study, and when Mike eavesdropped from the hall, he heard Dad release terrible, anguished sounds that were not crying, but something close to it. Because Dad couldn't cry even if his life depended on it. Mom would disappear into the bedroom when she came home, never leaving. Dad would go in after her, bringing her water and dinner. Mike really didn't see her throughout the week. For the first time in his life, he was really alone. So he waited. He kept waiting. He was really good at it, he thought, sketching and popping gum and listening to music. He would sit outside Lizzie's door, anticipating her grand arrival. She was probably just doing this because she would get so much attention when she came home. He did this for a few days, until the space outside her room became his new haven. He would sketch against her door, snapping his gum, humming his songs, and he would keep waiting. 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 At night, his mother ventured into the hall, peeking out into Mike's vision. Mike lit up. This was the first time he had seen Mom in 5 days. "Mom," he said, and he showed her his sketches. The circus baby animatronics had always been Liz's favorite, so Mike had been making drawings for her to maybe hang up on her wall when she got back. Dad had made each animatronic for each of his family members. Mike had been absolutely astounded to see that Dad had even made Foxy to resemble the mask that Mike had used to wear. Does Dad actually love me? Wondered the little voice in the back of his head. A baby had been for Liz, so Mike had drawn his sister with his favorite animatronic. Do you think she'll like it? Mom stared at the picture, and the longer she looked, the more life drained from her. Mom curtly nodded, and then she crept back into her room. Dad came upstairs, about to ignore Mike, but then he caught sight of what he'd drawn. Mike reddened as Dad took the notebook from him and studied its contents. I made it for Liz, he quietly elaborated. Baby is still waiting for her, Dad sharply ordered, dropping the book to the floor. Mike arched his head towards his father. Dad's eyes were so drained, and the circles underneath them had never been more accentuated. Dad looked awfully tired. Tired like he never had been. Are you okay, Dad? Mike genuinely asked. Dad opened his mouth, probably to retort something horrible, but then he changed his mind, staring at Mike for another moment. Then he turned back to the bedroom, and he shut the door behind him. The door didn't shut all the way, though. Mike's curiosity once again got the better of him, so he crawled on all fours to the doorframe, peeking through the slit where the door should have shut, but didn't. Mom was standing in front of the full-length mirror, not quite looking at herself, not quite looking at anything else, either. Dad approached her from behind, and her body shuddered when he placed his hands on her shoulders, bringing her close. I can't do it anymore, Mom whispered. Dad tutted and brought one of his hands to her neck, resting it there, squeezing gently as he tilted her head upward. Look at yourself, he ordered, but not unkindly, more sternly. Dad stroked Mom's cheek with his thumb and shook his head. Fascinating. Bill, she said, and she started crying. I can't do this anymore. I heard you, love. I can't look at him anymore. He's my son, and I can't look at him. Dad brought her closer and wiped the tears from her face, her back still positioned against him. Oh, love, he said, and he leaned in closer to her. You're so broken, aren't you? She nodded as her only response, and it looked like a switch went off in Dad's head, because he began to smile, the same way a plague quickly sweeps across a city, and his hold on her neck tightened. It's okay, love. I will fix you. Bill. Go ahead and say it for me, darling. He snaked a hand by Mom's thigh and let himself drift upwards, underneath her skirt. Say it. You'll... Mom sighed, shook her head, and shut her eyes. You'll fix me. Open your eyes, love. She did so, and when she made eye contact with herself, it looked like something snapped. Her eyes darted down the mirror, and then she and Mike made contact. Mike stifled a gasp and scampered back into his room, gently shutting the door behind him and cowering under the blanket. He didn't know why he looked for so long. He didn't think he would ever know why he kept watching the strange sight unfold. Maybe because he hardly saw Mom anymore. Maybe because he wanted to see how Dad controlled people. Maybe because he wanted to be the bearer of an Afton secret. Maybe because the back of his mind knew that it was the last time he would ever see his mother. Dad went to the restaurant for the first time in a week. Mom still hadn't left her room, so while he was waiting for Liz, Mike went downstairs, got her a glass of orange juice, and rapped on her door. She didn't answer, so he opened the door. It's noon and Mom's still sleeping? Mom? Mike said, as he tiptoed over to her side of the bed. I brought you this. I thought that you should get up. She didn't stir. He set the glass down on her bedside table and looked at her. He did not notice the empty bottle of pills beside the lamp. Her eyes were shut, but she was paler than usual. And after a moment of horror, Mike realized her chest wasn't rising. "Mom?" Mike said, and he put his hands on her and tried to shake her awake. "Mom? Mom? Mom, you gotta get up. Mom, please, you've gotta get up. Mom, Mommy, please, get up. Mom, please. You can't look at me. Keep your eyes shut when you get up. You've gotta get up. You've gotta get up, Mom. Please, you can't leave me alone with him. I know Lizzie isn't coming back." It was the first time Mike admitted to it himself. And now he was crying. "So you can't leave me here alone with him. I'll be good. I'll do whatever the both of you want, I promise. I just don't want to be alone, please. I don't want to be alone with him. I think he's gonna kill me. Mom, please, get up. Mommy, please, get up. Please." He kept shaking her. Maybe just for a few minutes. Maybe just for an hour. At some point, though, he looked at his feet, and he saw a note that had fallen from the dresser and onto the floor. In Mom's handwriting, hastily scribbled, was, "Stop trying to fix everything." Mike rushed downstairs to the landline and dialed the restaurant's private number. "Michael? Slow down, I can hardly..." "Dad, please, you have to come home. She's not waking up. She's not waking up. She won't wake up. I'm sorry." Mike sat with his father. They were in Circus Babies. Ballora was prancing across the stage, agile movements that only Dad could have ever programmed. Dad was drinking a beer, and Mike was shocked when Dad offered him one. Not wanting to disappoint him any further, Mike took it. It tasted like piss, he thought, but he kept drinking until he was lightheaded, because he just wanted to do what his father told him to do. "Your mother," Dad said, and his voice was distant as he watched Ballora waltz, her long leg pirouetting into the air as she twirled. "Was a dancer. Best dancer I'd ever seen. I made Ballora for her, you see. I made 'em all. For all of you." Mike jumped when the door to the ballroom slammed behind them. "Will," Uncle Henry said, inexplicably having arrived. "I'll take you home. Come on." Uncle Henry walked over to Mike, frowned at the beer in his hand, and supported him to stand. "Wait over there for us, okay, Mike? I'll be there in just a moment." Mike sluggishly nodded and obeyed, heading to the door. He lingered, though, as he watched Dad fall onto Uncle Henry, his body convulsing but not quite crying. Dad reached into his pocket and withdrew Mom's final testament, shaking it in front of Henry. "How could she ask me this, Henry? How could she ask me to not fix it? How could she betray me like that?" will, Henry said. And the two of them leaned on each other like trees twisting into each other's bodies, dooming each other to be their only source of support, while at the same time robbing them of precious sunlight and water. How could she ask me? I fix things, Henry. I can fix her, Henry. I can fix all of them. Don't they trust me to fix it? I can, I will, and I must. I am going to fix it. I'm going to... Dad wasn't crying. Because, again, he couldn't really cry. But he was wretchedly screaming. And Mike thought that if there was the manifestation of death as a sound, it was what his father was doing. Michael, Dad said, after Uncle Henry had driven them home, and he knelt before Mike and placed his hands on his shoulders. Your mother told me not to try to fix everything. I cannot do that, however. You know me, yeah? I will fix it. Then, Dad began to maniacally smile. I am going to rectify the terrible thing you've done, Mike. I've been researching, and I understand now how to save them. Your mother, your sister, your brother. Tell me, Mike, don't you want to be free of the horrible thing you did? Mike was empty. I just want whatever you want, Dad. Dad sharply laughed, like a villain from one of the Disney movies that Liz used to watch. Don't think about Liz. Don't think about her. No, it's your fault that she's dead. It's your fault. Mom is dead because you killed Evan. And you broke all of them and everything forever. That's so wonderful answer, Michael. See, you're getting smarter, aren't you? Oh, about time, eh? Dad chuckled like it was an inside joke between them. I need to plan more, of course. It's only been a few months until the new year. My boy, I do believe 1985 will be such a wonderful time for us. Why? Dad smiled so sinisterly. But behind it, he was broken. He was broken just like his son. Just like all the rest of his loved ones. That Mike felt faint. Because I'm gonna bring them back. I'm gonna bring back all of them. He cleared his throat and patted Mike on the shoulders. Have I told you about Remnant, Mike? Mike shook his head, and Dad laughed again. Dad never stopped laughing. We have much to discuss. We have the time. After all, now. We are alone. Together. Alone together. Maybe Mom was broken. And maybe Liz broke too. And maybe even Dad. But none more so than Mike. And water was filling his lungs. And he just belonged to his dad. Because they were alone together.